96.1. I'm Janelle Prasad. No, it's not Spectrum Radio. What are you clicking?
No, I was like, okay, I was thinking panicking. Yeah, go ahead.
Isn't the station
Yeah.
named Voice FM? Dude, calm down. I've been doing this for like about 16 years. Right. Okay, so yeah, you're tuned to Spectrum Radio, and we started a conversation a couple of minutes ago looking at gender and gods, and we have online with us Ferlin Pedro, who's from an organization. The name is too long for me to remember to call. He's gonna tell you. He's gonna remind you when he comes on a little bit. And we've got Ms. Barrow. And we've been chatting about their organizations and specifically some of the what they've been up to over the last couple of years as relates to their specific mandates and some of the challenges they've had. And so we're gonna just bring the conversation now to specifically gender and religion, and see how we can come up with some. Well, we want to talk about it, right? But also at the end of it, I believe that when you have conversations or discussions like this, there must be some end, and people at home, whoever's listening, can sort of understand and get a clear path of what we're trying to say, where we want to see Guyana as it relates to this issue.
It's so general. Like I mentioned earlier, the Anglican Diocese, we've been open to allowing LGBT persons, women, minorities, we have disabled persons attending church. We have allowed them to play a role, and they're allowed to. There's no restriction, but as far as I know, there is no laws yet allowing LGBT person to be ordained within the priesthood in Guyana, that is, because I know it's happening at other...
This is with your specific body, because that deals with human rights. Would that be something that you'd want to advocate for? I think my mic is giving some problems again. Yeah, so would that be something that you'd push, you specifically? Because if the laws don't exist within the church, but you notice that these things are happening, and that's something that you want to see as someone who believes in human rights, right? And equality of people generally.
That would be something good to see, in my opinion, but at the same time, the law, I don't think it can exist if LGBT persons have not really shown an interest in certain roles within the church. As far as I know, there are only 2 LGBT persons that have been very proactive, because they are silent sleepers. Some persons might be there, but they are not open themselves to the public. They say, well, I'm LGBT or I'm bisexual or so forth, but there are at least 2 that I know that are open and have been participating tremendously, but they have not shown an interest in the priesthood.
Do you think the absence of the laws that allow them to fully participate contributes to them not being like freely and open? Because I mean, you live in a society where, you know, there are lots of
restrictions,
stigma and discrimination, right? And it limits, you know, it limits people to a significant degree of what they can and cannot do. And so in this specific case that you're saying, they have to show interest first. So do we wait until like huge numbers of LGBTQI individuals just talk and say, well, I want to have a role? Or can you now just notice that there is room for change and push for it to happen before?
I think
with courage. Like if I'm gay and I want to be part, but if I see I can, then I would actually push to get there, right?
I know what you're saying, I definitely understand, but at the same time, certain procedures, at least within the Anglican diocese, you know, it needs to go to synod, it needs to go to provincial synod, then it needs to go to the bishop and so forth, because at this we're trying to even get the bishop to one of the archdeacons, and that has been ongoing for the past 3 years. But another challenge, I think, that's the reason why that has not happened, and you know, it has not actually been on the forefront, is because there has been a lot of discrimination, as you mentioned, when it comes to the LGBT and even attending church. So I know there are a few LGBT persons attending churches within the Anglican Diocese, but in general, LGBT persons, you know what they deem the church as people that judge them, and it's a sin coming from some church members, so they don't want to go to church to be judged. So they withhold their attendance and participation because people don't want to hear, well, you know, don't come, don't this, and what you're doing is ungodly, but the sin is sin, at least to me it is. So, you know, what we've done, we've encouraged them to come, you know, and they participate, and we've not withheld them from having certain roles. But in regards to the clergy, I know there have been
no movement in that regard. Ferlin, you wanna chime in here?
Ms. Barrs speak about the Anglican Church and the clergy, and she's also articulated some reasons why people or members within the church or the organization might not want to come out openly gay or lesbian or whatever the case may be. And now this is not to my challenge to Ms. Barrs would be, as I hope it's not taken as an attack to Ms. Barrs, but I want to just say it that, you know, religion in Guyana is continuously evolving. It's these are religions that we're talking about that has very strong beliefs, and these beliefs are traditional in nature. They come from a long history of sustaining that tradition. And there are certain beliefs that have evolved, certain beliefs that have changed, certain beliefs haven't. And one such belief that hasn't quite changed, at least within Guyanese society to a great extent, is this belief that homosexuality is a sin. Now, Ms. Barrs told us about, you know, why some church members might not want to come up gay or lesbian. And she spoke about the idea of it being a sin, and that may have some sort of psychological impact on those individuals. I mean, I agree with her entirely on that note, and this is specifically why we need to talk about religious belief in the public domain, which is something that we don't do often. We go to church, we sit, we spend an hour or two, and we listen to a sermon. And the sermon may have certain passages within the Bible that the pastor or the priest might consider to support a specific agenda. Let's say one of those agenda is against LGBT people. Now, if I'm a member, a sitting member, and I'm listening to the sermon, I'm going to be, you know, very skeptical about my identity, my sexuality, if I am to myself considered to be gay or, you know, or queer or something of the sort. So I think it's very important that we not leave the conversation within the confines of the church. We need to bring this conversation outside of the church, because we know that there are many churches in Guyana. I myself came from one particular church that was against homosexuality to a great degree, because most of the publications on LGBT, homosexuals, and so on, it was very clear that they were anti-LGBT, anti-homosexuality. But what's very important to understand about these churches and their beliefs is that they're getting these beliefs from what's considered to be a holy book, the sole authority source of their morals. And once we bring that into the equation, then we can engage the religious people who support this anti-LGBT, anti-homosexuality narrative. We can better understand why they believe what they believe, and how we can make more appropriate, more mutually beneficial conversations to get beyond that anti-sentiment. We don't want the anti-sentiment. What we want is acceptance. And acceptance is, I think, the core of human rights organizations that are peddling LGBT issues. Right?
Yeah. Actually, I agree with everything that you said. With the exception of this acceptance thing, I have a huge issue with so I was raised Christian, baptized and everything in church and so on, and then, you know, as I'm growing up and I'm reading and I'm, you know, like learning and being enlightened, I started to change my perspective on a lot of issues. I'm still unlearning a whole lot of issues, but when it comes to LGBTQI, a couple of other letters there, it's evolving. When it comes to that particular issue, I used to say, oh well, you know, I'm tolerant. And then later on, you know, as I supposedly progressed, I said, well, you know, I'm accepting. And then the other day, I decided, maybe about 2 years ago or so, I'm like, excuse me, who are you, Janelle Prasad? Like, who are you to tolerate or accept or any of those things? Is there anyone walking around to say, well, when you have sex out of marriage, because I have a son and I'm unmarried. I mean, who's walking around to say, well, I tolerate Janelle's behavior, or I accept now that it's okay for her to, so I feel like when I hear that now, because I've just moved past that, I'm like, yeah, it's not anyone's place to be. I mean, I don't know what other word we can use, but I go on.
The use of acceptance, and of course, I get where you're coming from when it comes to that. Who is to say that I should feel as though people who are watching me should endorse my behavior and my activities? And that's a valid concern, and most individuals would feel that way. I think the whole notion of acceptance, at least at the societal level, when it comes to state law and respect, especially when it comes to equal respect among citizens, I think the core point of acceptance there is to ensure that people who partake in this social framework, this society as we call it, they can go on to manifest who they are. They can be whoever they want to be, and not feel as though they're constantly being judged or constantly being condemned or constantly being watched and by some moral code or moral conduct that's sort of watching over you. We don't want that. I think ideally what we do want is the ability to mobilize in society, be who we want to be who we truly are, and not feel inhibited and have our rights infringed in order to fulfill some sort of arbitrary terms that someone else thinks is right or supreme or the authority. So when it comes to this notion of acceptance, this is what I mean when I invoke it.
Okay, I get you.
So Pedro, I echo your and Janelle's sentiments, because only before we came back on air, I was sharing the same sentiments with Janelle when it came to premarital sex, and it is prevalent in Guyana since we have an increased teenage pregnancy rate. But then there are other social issues as well that are happening, and what people fail to realize, or they don't want to admit to themselves, that the sinners outside of the church are the same sinners that go into the church. So the only way we can even try to really mobilize the change that we're trying to achieve is if we start with the church, attack the same issues within the church, because it's the same sinners attending the church. So we need to talk about these issues. We need to talk about the various groups now that we have within society. I mean, it might take some time to change, because there are going to be some stubborn ones when it comes to accepting the LGBT community and even disabled persons, and some women that have been much more independent in their political lives and having a stand when it comes to things like even abortion. But at the same time, it needs to be addressed. We need to speak a little bit more about it. I've seen issues whereby, at least when I was younger, attending a church, and a young lady had gotten pregnant and she was asked to resign from the role because she was younger than 20 and she was unwed, and she was being pressured to marry this young man. At least personally, I did not agree, because at the same time it came up as an arranged marriage. I mean, the act happened, but then there are other acts that happen that sometimes the church might condone, whereby persons might even be ashamed to get a divorce because of how persons within the church might view them. So they prefer to stay in a relationship that might be abusive and unhealthy. And that has very much evolved, at least in my time and in my church. I've seen that definitely change. And the same opinion I share when it comes to LGBT community, because there was a time whereby, persons, some of them might not have gone to church at all. From now, I'm seeing one even leading organizations, that person has been very much present, and they've been assisting and mobilizing. And because that person has been there, I think there are other members of the LGBT community that have been encouraged by the individual to come out, because a person attends the church with the partner as well, and they, at least their family has openly accepted them along with the priest. So we have a long journey. It's a long way to go. We'll be moving from different sin to sin, but we need to realize that sin is sin. For me, it really doesn't change, and when people are going to realize that, they're going to stop using a longer measuring stick to judge persons.
Right.
If I may, I mean, I agree, and I welcome all of that, and definitely the internal aspect of change is exactly what we need from church organizations that have an issue with LGBT people. We have to start from the inside to make that appearance on the outside. But what I think, maybe you can shed some insight on this, but what I think is that, wouldn't you think that the authorities at the top, the clerics, the clergy, the priests, the pastors, the people who make the policies, who set the doctrine of the church, they're the ones who will truly be the challenge, the most challenging aspect of this sort of change within church.
Yes.
So let me just make this point so you can answer both, because what is the obsession with like specific parts of quote unquote sin? Like we've got like a whole lot of others like you mentioned, but there are some people who are not going to bend for specific ones. I mean, what is the obsession with? Why are people still concerned somehow about consenting adults engaging in sexual activity or whatever? I just want to so when you're answering Ferlin's question, maybe as someone who's involved, because I haven't been Christian for a long time, you could explain.
So let me answer Ferlin's question first. Ferlin, I do agree with you. I believe those decisions and the policies can actually be made from the clergymen, such persons as the bishops and the head bishops, but at least within the Anglican diocese, what happens is that a bishop can only be elected by a certain percentage, and a certain percentage comes from the lay person, someone like myself that is not within the clergy. So what people need to do, if they want to put certain persons in place that might have a little bit more open mind, I would like to say, and can really mobilize a change that they see people are trying to achieve, you vote for those persons. So people need to get involved, be present, so that you can say, well, I want someone that's gonna, allow the LGBT person to become a priest or a pastor, and then at the same time you vote for someone that is totally against or might not be as strongly, leaning towards the side of it. Because when a person gets in power, they will not push the movement as much. Because even with our organization, we might be trying to put forward strategies, it still needs to go to the bishop. At least that's in my diocese how I can see it happening, because it's going to come from a top-down approach. We're going to push it, but then the decision still needs to be made from the top.
Yeah, but that seems like a very democratic system. I'm not sure that other churches or institutions have a similar measure. So, where you can essentially decide, oh, I want this pastor, and I will vote for this pastor.
Yeah, I'm not sure how it goes.
Or leader, or whatever else.
I know within the Catholic Church.
Right.
Yes, that's why there is a vote when it comes for them. You need the Senate. It happens at the Senate, you might get a lay person and clergy, but the majority of the person that vote are the lay persons, a regular church for that and church. So those are the people that are going to vote for who the bishop should be. What I know, at least in the Catholic Church in Guyana, from my knowledge, when it comes to LGBT community, it has not been accepted as yet, and the same goes for abortion. When it comes to Catholics in Guyana, I know Catholics in different parts of the country they've been much more open to a woman having an abortion. It's a human right, actually. So now to answer Janelle's question, when it comes to the measuring of the sin, in my opinion, I think they just see it as a scorn. It's like the scorn in a woman for to have the premarital sex. And I say woman because no one realized that the sex doesn't happen alone. It's actually happening with someone. So more of the weight and the judgment goes on the actual woman.
No, this alone thing is sort of relative.
Because like I gave the example, when the woman becomes pregnant, no one asks, well, who's the man and what they're going to do with him? Is he being removed from any sort of organization? Is he going to any part-time ban? No, but I've seen a woman had to step down, a young woman having to step down, she's had to remove her rose, like you're literally trying to explain yourself. But I don't know why it's such a big deal, because I've heard stories of older people, and that is, I think, the generation from 70s and 80s and way up, they've done the same premarital sex that they try to come down on the younger generation for. It's just that it might be a little bit more prevalent in society today, whereby young people are doing it a little bit more openly, the discussion is a little bit more broader, so it comes across as though the woman is loose or slack. And so when the LGBT persons, you know, they see them on the road, they see them in church. I think they're using the same way to judge them, because the LGBT community has been in existence for years, at least since I've been growing to now, and it has been discussed in the Bible, the Sodom and Gomorrah. So it's not something that has been happening recently. It's just because they become more vocal, whereby they're pushing to get a presence and to be involved and for person to accept them. Because I've never really been tolerant of LGBT persons. I've always accepted them, and I've always been involved in Anglican body. I grew up there, I'm still there, because, you know, it's just me personally. And if it's an LGBT person and they want to come to church, they want to do anything, that's fine with me. I know to accept it, because I believe it's their human right, it's their equal right to get involved with that. But that's just me personally. And when I try to share an opinion or get someone else a little bit more involved, it takes a little bit of time. But like I said, we have a long way to go.
Right. Okay. So let's just shift the conversation as we wrap up to because Ferlin, you mentioned in your when you spoke earlier about there have been changes in society on various issues that are sort of like an evolution, but when it comes to the way we perceive or view LGBTQ, that sort of remains constant. So how do we we'll go for a break. So when we come back, we can talk about how do we begin to get that kind of change in a wider society outside of church, to the point where conversations like these may no longer be necessary, because we're going to be talking about different social ills and different issues that are affecting society. Yeah. All right. So we'll take a quick music break, and then we come back. We can touch on that. I'd like to hear what you guys have to say on that. This is Spectrum Radio. You're tuned in to 96.1 Voice FM.